become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say, way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, we have sorely changed. Whoa.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Yes, oh, thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, please. Oh, no, you. No, I'm clapping for you. Keep clapping. Keep clapping. Clap for the Wednesday miracle. How would we know that you wanted the Wednesday miracle if you didn't keep clapping? Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. Thank you for joining us tonight, Wednesday, October the 13th already? Every week I do this where I'm freaking out how this year's almost over, but I am happy to be here. Why? Because you're here with me. But also because this is going to be a fantastic show. We have a really, really cool guest, and we're going to be talking about a really important subject that is getting more important by the day, especially if you're a small business owner. So more on that soon. As you know, this is a Muddy Waters Media production. Check us out on all social media venues, on all podcasting platforms, everywhere that something can be on the internet like this, and even some things really prefer we not be on the internet like this. We're still there. Check us out. Also go to muddywatersmedia.com and anchor.fm/muddied waters for all of your podcasting. And also be sure, of course, to become a subscriber. Join the Muddied Militia. Become a Mudsketeer. We still haven't actually figured out what we're going to call this, but become a member and a subscriber by going to anchor.fm/muddywaters/subscribe. Get access to members-only content and a monthly members-only Zoom call, the Muddied Zoom, that we will also be live streaming so you can make all your friends jealous that you get to hang out with us and they don't until they become a member too. So it's actually kind of a trap to get your friends to join. Anyway, this episode, of course, is brought to you by the Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus, the second largest caucus it's actually the largest caucus at Waffle House, but it's the second largest caucus in the Libertarian Party and the fastest growing one. At this pace, the Waffle House Caucus will be the largest caucus in the Libertarian Party. Take that for whatever it's worth. Become a member today by going to the Facebook group Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus, and also go to the Muddy Waters Media store to become an official voting member, which means absolutely nothing. We don't vote on it. It's a giant joke. But you can go to the store and you can buy Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus shirts and buttons, and I think a hat. I think we have a hat too. I'm not 100% sure on that, but the Gravy King, Cumberland Cannabis Co. If you want viable, ethical, and effective Delta and CBD products made lovingly and viably and ethically and effectively in Cumberland County, Tennessee, go to cumberlandcannabisco.com and you will get weed, actually. Joe Solosky is running for governor of Pennsylvania. Joe Solosky is the key to Pennsylvania's success, and if you want to help him become the first libertarian governor ever, go to joesolosky.com. That's JoeSoloski.com. Mudwater, the most appropriately named sponsor to ever be on Muddy Waters Media. If you woke up today and said, Spike, my God, I am so sick of coffee, and if I never have another cup again, it'll be too soon, and I'll feel like I've lost my mind. Well, you probably already have, because you're yelling at me first thing in the morning. I don't even hear you. I don't even know you. But if you don't want to have coffee anymore and you want something similar to it, you can have this. It's made of masala chai, cacao, mushrooms, turmeric, sea salt, cinnamon, and the honey you should probably put in it too, because it doesn't. I mean, it tastes like what you would expect those ingredients to taste like if you put them together. But it is very effective. I use it every day. And if you want to have 1/7 of the caffeine of coffee, just enough caffeine to get you happy, like this. But not so much caffeine that you end up in a funk at the end of the day, like this. then go to muddywatersmedia.com/mud and get some mud water today. Jack Casey has written 3 books. What are they about? I will never know. I refuse to read them because they're a sponsor. And if they're bad, I'll feel bad for trying to get you to buy them. And if they're good, I'll feel bad for making fun of them for the past several months. So you'll have to read them for yourself and find out. I am told by people who have purchased them that these books are in fact good, which is good. Then they start to tell me what they're about and I go, because I don't want to hear it. I don't want to know what these books are about. But if you go to theroyalgreen.com, you can find out what these books are about. Adderpan, the most horrifying video game to ever be made or played. Available on Steam for some reason. I don't know why, but it's there. They do allow it, and it's only $5, plus the cost of your ongoing mental health care for you and your loved ones. Adderpan's the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. If you're into that, then have at it. I would definitely stop drinking coffee and start using mud water before you do this, because holy crap. Adderpan, available on Steam for $5. Thomas Queter is running for state senate in the 52nd District of New York. Thomas Queter says, I run better than Albany, which is hilarious because he's in a wheelchair. I hate, he makes me say that. And it is so uncomfortable saying that. Anyway, Thomas Queter's a really great guy. He's one of the most loving and caring and dedicated people. His character is second to none. The 52nd District of New York couldn't do any better than Thomas Queter, even if he keeps making me feel uncomfortable for he literally, in the notes, he wants me to say, and that's funny because he's a cripple. And Thomas Queter, if you want to help Thomas Queter become the first libertarian state senator in New York ever, go to tomfor52.com. That's TOMFOR52.com. Our newest sponsor is Defy the Power and Stitches and Glitches. Now, if you watch Muddy Waters Media, you've seen their tumblers that we've auctioned off before and that I've used myself. These tumblers are insanely high quality. They are insanely high. They're very good at keeping your cools cool and your hots hot. And you don't even have to tell it which is which. It somehow knows. If you want it to be cold or hot. I clearly don't know much about science, but it knows. And also, and this is insane, it's free to customize it. You just pay the same cost for the tumbler, no matter what you have them do, which I've never heard of before. I'm not sure it's a good idea for them to do it, but yet they're doing it, so I have to advertise it. All customizations are free, and if you see the kind of customizations they do, you will be as shocked as I am to say it. If you go to either Defy the Power for the libertarian political stuff and Stitches and Glitches for everything else, or I guess technically if you're customizing it, you can go to either. And if you use the code MuddyTumbler, you get 10% off. But not 10% off the customization, because that part's free. Again, I don't get it. If after watching these ads you say, Spike, I'm horrified, I'm angry, you've wasted my time, and I'm going to sue you. Well, if you're in Florida, good luck, pal, because I'm going to sue you back with personal injury attorney Chris Reynolds, attorney at law. If you go to chrisreynoldslaw.com, you'll see who I'm going to sue you with, and you're probably going to be scared, and you probably will back off trying to sue me. But if you're in Florida and you want to sue someone else, you should go to personal injury attorney Chris Reynolds, attorney at law, by going to chrisreynoldslaw.com. He will get you so much money that it's, again, I've said this before, but like how people walk around and they have these big stacks of money and they pretend it's like a phone and they're like, hey mom, how are you? I'm sorry. Oh, this is one of my big stacks of money. That's what you can do after you hire Chris Reynolds to sue someone. I can't promise that, but I mean, if anyone can get you big stacks of money, it's Chris Reynolds, chrisreynoldslaw.com. The intro and outro music to this and every single episode of My Fellow Americans comes from the amazing and talented Mr. Joe Davi. That's Jodavi. Go to his Facebook, his SoundCloud, go to his Bandcamp, Joe Davi Music Bandcamp.bandcamp.com. You can buy his entire discography. It's like $25. He just dropped a new album. All this music, years worth of music. Go right now. Thank you so much, Joe Davi. I'd like to thank Libleu for this delicious drinking water that I'm drinking on this episode of My Fellow Americans. It is oxygenated with ozone, BPA-free, non-carbonated, and kosher certified, just like me. Buluvanaka. It is good water. Shout out to Tehran Turks' mom and him as always. Folks, my guest tonight is a recovering investment banker, and I can't wait to find out what that actually means. She's a recovering investment banker and a small business expert. She has been named a top 100 small business influencer for 2011 to 2015 by the Small Biz Trends. She is a frequent panelist on networks like Fox Business, CNBC, MSNBC, and CNN. Her first book, The Entrepreneur Equation, is a New York Times bestseller, and her new book, which I am looking for here, because I put it in the note. Oh, I put it on the net. I'll have to show you a picture of the book because I put it in the wrong frame. But her new book, The War on Small Business, was just released and is available at all major booksellers. Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, please welcome to the show Ms. Carol Roth. There it is. There you go. Carol, thank you so much for coming on.
Stacks of cash for my ears, which I actually should, since I'm pretty good at making people a lot of money as well as one of your advertisers. But I figured I would just add that in for a little visual. Hi, Spike.
Hi, how are you doing? No, it's perfect. And now I have this book thing, which is less powerful now that I'm not, referencing it in an intro. But there it is. And yeah, we can get, so like moving forward, you want to get, and the thing is, if you do it like from the side, they can be $1 bills. You don't have to show them, maybe have like 100 where they can see it on the front and back.
I'm not an amateur. I'm going to go full out if I'm going to bother doing it.
All hundreds.
Yeah, all hundreds all the time. Real, not like sometimes they use the fake money, but I'm really glad we could do this because you and I have been like trying to do this for almost 24 hours. So I'm glad that we were able to work.
It has been so hard to nail you down. For minutes, entire minutes, I have spent just pining to be able to get you on the show. No, this has been, you are actually on a list, and I can promise you, I can pull up the list. You have been on a list of people for me to contact.
As a fellow Jew, I'm not super comfortable being on lists, just putting it out there.
Wow. Okay, so you're going to be worse than me on this show.
Oh, nobody filled you in on that. Okay.
No one told me that you would be worse than me. No, this is good. This is good because then people will say, I look forward to watching Spike because he's just a breath of fresh air, being so sober and serious all the time. So no, that'll be perfect. You can be the Gilbert Gottfried of this episode. So that'll be great.
But I was in fact on a list, as you click.
You were, and it was a good list. It was a good list. It was not the list. It was a list. It was not Schindler's List. It was well, actually Schindler's List was a good list. It was a Schindler's List of who I'm going to invite to my show. And so then when I saw that I was being tagged in someone saying you should come on Muddy Waters, I'm like, perfect. And so now here you are. This is great. We're going to have a fantastic time. I have to start with this. Recovering investment banker. What is that? I have to know what that means.
So recovering investment banker, it's basically a 12-step process. And I never really get out of step 11 because once you have done lots and lots of deals and transactions, there's always someone who's like, oh, can you help me take a look at this? Or can I get your advice on this thing? Or, this, that, and the other thing. And I happen to sit on some boards that are always looking at deals. So I've never quite extracted myself fully from investment banking and deal making, although it is not what I consider my profession.
Okay. So it's similar. So there's not like a place you go. Is there a place where you go and you get up and go, my name is Carol, I am an investment banker, and everyone's like, hello, Carol, and is that like, so you're not there? And
everyone's wearing fleece Patagonia vests, and that's sort of how it rolls.
Yeah, Balenciaga slippers and stuff, and they're like, hello, Carol, thank you so much. Okay, all right, good. So you early career in investment banking, you actually became an officer at the bank at the age of 25. What got you into investment banking? Because with a name like Roth, you're obviously an Episcopalian. So what got you into investment banking?
All right. So first, since you mentioned the Roth thing, I'm just going to say that wasn't my maiden name, but I did manifest it because my maiden name was Schneiderman, which is 12 letters. And I told all of my friends in high school that I was going to marry someone with a 4-letter last name. And, there were Levy's, there were Golds, there were lots of choices.
You had options.
Yeah. But at any rate, so I actually came from a family where neither of my parents graduated from college. My dad was an electrician, probably the only Jewish electrician that anybody's ever heard of. So, you can tell, come from a long line of sort of exceptions to the rule. And
Right.
I was able to get myself into Wharton undergrad, which is, sort of the best undergraduate business program in the country.
Yeah.
And my
yeah.
dad was like, that's nice. Who is paying for that? And my dad was very financially savvy, even though he wasn't sort of formally educated in that realm. He had a lot of common sense and a lot of sort of financial knowledge. And so we ran an ROI calculation and said, if you go to the school, there are these kinds of jobs that you can get coming out and you're making a lot of money. And that was the deal. It's like, okay, you can go, but you're going to have to pay for most of it. And you're
Right.
going to have to pay it off as fast as you can. Because in my family, debt was, unless you were using it for an investment, debt just for debt's sake is not a good thing. So
Right.
when I got to Wharton, and this is, back in the early 90s, I racked up, even though I had some scholarships and I worked through school and I did all this stuff, I came out with $40,000 of college debt by 95. And so I knew, listening to my dad, that I had to pay it off as quickly as possible. So there's sort of two paths to do that and learn a ton. If for people who really like to deep dive into something, they go into management consulting, and people who have ADD and want to do like a million things at once go into investment banking. So clearly I was going to go into investment banking, and it really was to get unparalleled experience at a young age and to just create the financial flexibility. But I never went in because, I wanted to be the world's best investment banker. In fact, I'd never even heard of it until I got to college. And so it was clear that that wasn't necessarily going to be where I ended up, for my life.
A rare person who gets into investment banking for the money.
I know it's an outlier, but to be fair, this is a story that not a lot of people know. The reason I ended up working at the investment bank that I did was because I wanted a free trip to San Francisco, where the bank was located. I had never been. I knew I wasn't going to be able to sort of afford it myself. And in investment banking, if you get past a certain round of interviews, they fly you out. And I actually was competing in a beauty pageant the day of my interview and couldn't make it, and had to call up the recruiter and say, I'm sorry, I can't make the investment banking interview. I'm going to be in a beauty pageant, but is there something else that we can possibly do? And he's like, you can't possibly be serious. And I'm like, oh no, I'm serious. And I wanted that free trip so badly. I kept calling him back. And on like the 17th call, he's like, you are the most persistent MFer that like I've ever met in my entire life. Fine, you can have the interview. And then I went to the process, and I worked my way out to San Francisco, and I'm like, I actually really like this company. I ended up working for them, but really had no intention going in. So it's always good to be open to possibilities. But the reason I mentioned that is that even though I went into investment banking for the money, the unusual part is obviously that I missed my first interview because I was in a beauty pageant and couldn't make it.
No, that's beautiful. And this explains, incidentally, before we get too far, you also, do I see a action figure behind you that looks suspiciously like recovering investment banker Carol Roth?
Funny that you mentioned that. Yes, I do have my own action figure made in my likeness that is made to look like the book cover of The Entrepreneur Equation. And this is one of those things that tends to make people very jealous. And yeah, that's me.
Okay, that's good. So that was for your first book, The Entrepreneur Equation.
Yes, the first book.
Okay, the War on Small Business, they could have made one where you're like not happy with with the state of things.
The supply chain was all messed up, so they couldn't make one.
See, well, okay, let's don't get ahead in the notes. We're going to talk about that, but okay, so your father, he says, listen, Schneiderman Electric will help you a little bit, but you got to pay for most of it yourself. You got your debt, you got your free job, or free trip, went and helped pay off your debt. Then you got into, so what happened? You get out of investment banking, and then is that when you started getting into small business? Because, I mean, obviously your career is focusing heavily on small business. What got you into that? Was that seamless coming out of investment banking into small business?
Not really, actually. What kind of tied me into the plight of the small business owner, so to speak. I'm sort of an entrepreneurial person at heart. I was the kid who was always selling anything. I ran a football pool in college to help pay for college, any way to sort of hustle. So I always had sort of an affinity towards the small business owner. But when I was in investment banking, I would field calls like all day long from small business owners who were getting really bad advice and wanting to hire me or the investment bank to help them. And obviously, like, they couldn't afford the retainer fee, let alone, an overall fee. And I always felt really badly that I couldn't help them, and that the people who were willing to help them probably weren't giving them the best advice. So when I started transitioning away from investment banking, ultimately, I said, is there a way to kind of use and leverage a media platform, like others had done in personal finance and whatnot, to be able to provide better advice to small business owners and to help small business owners in a way where it wasn't, depending on sort of that one-to-one payment. And so it really, strangely enough, was from the investment banking experience that brought me into the plight of the small business owner. And then as I dug more into it and really tied that into how important they were for the economy and economic freedom, it was just always been an important part of who I am and what I do.
Very good. So obviously, the importance of small business to that business owner or entrepreneur or the people working for them is obvious. I mean, that it is how they provide for their families. It is how they build a financial legacy. It's how they find a need that isn't being met by the market or isn't being met as well as they could provide it to the market and to provide it. But what is the importance to our overall economy to have an environment that has successful small businesses, an ecosystem that encourages or at least allows success of small businesses?
Yeah, well, I think that, the things that you were describing, the economic freedom, the opportunity to be able to pursue your own path economically is actually really important. And it's why we attract people from all over the world to America to be able to pursue that for all the reasons that you said, or for a passion or for whatnot. And so that in and of itself is important. But, if you sort of aggregate it all together, before COVID, small business was about half the GDP and about half the jobs in this country. So a very big contributor, but in a very decentralized fashion. So even though it's 99.9% of all the small business entities, it's spread over 31.7 million different entities. Most of those are individual businesses. About 6 million of those had the employees and we're the job creators. So, obviously from a overall standpoint, it's huge. But then for the ones that have employees or who have contractors or vendors, every time that you do an economic transaction with one of those, whether you're paying them to work for you or you're buying from them or whatnot, obviously that helps them keep their employees in line and or on board, and gives them money to go out and spend in the local economy. And so it helps to grow the economy. And additionally, obviously, innovations and things that help make our lives better and more comfortable. And obviously, every big business that's out there has in some way, unless it was a spinoff, been a small business at one point in their lives.
Yeah, every business started, usually every business started as a small business at some point. So in your book, and this is why I put it here, I just forgot to put it on the other one, there it is. In The War on Small Business, How Government Used the Pandemic to Crush the Backbone of America. When I said that you were my guest tonight, one of the first comments was from someone named Desiree, one of my followers who or fans who her story I think is going to talk a lot about what is going to be a brief rundown of what's in your book. She said, I was trying to open a small boutique bakery a few months ago. Government required that I install a 1,000-gallon grease trap in the ground outside, or I couldn't move forward. This was a one-person bakery with no fryers, not even a stove, just an oven. It would have cost me about $11,000 plus the cost to have it professionally cleaned on a schedule. Government is not your friend. In your book, I assume that this is a very common thing. Why? Tell me about I guess let's start with, what was it that inspired you to write the book, to write this book?
So I was approached by HarperCollins very early during the pandemic to do an economic redux of what was sure to be a very historic moment economically. And I really didn't know what the thesis of the book was going to be. I didn't know fully what the outcome was going to be. I had some ideas, but I was actually following real time. And I sort of wrote like 3.5 different books during the pandemic, all with slightly different titles that are all somewhat relevant to the final output. But from the very beginning, because of my background and knowledge of small business, as soon as they started shutting down small businesses first and looking at the, quote unquote, packages of aid that they were going to offer up, it was very clear that that was going to be a key component of the story. It wasn't until I really dug in that I saw it was, a big part of the story. And so, as I sorted through all of this information real time, it was very clear that the government was picking winners and losers. They were going to decide who was going to thrive and who was going to fight to survive. And they did this not based on data or science, but based on political clout and connections. And guess who doesn't have political clout and connections? Small business. And then, that sort of begot this incredibly epic historic transfer of wealth from Main Street to Wall Street, something that we've just never seen before. And obviously, the small businesses of Main Street, as well as individuals, really got the bad end of that trade. And so as I kind of went through this thesis, that was the story. It's still probably the most important story that's out there. And strangely, it's not one that enough big media has really covered.
Yeah, that's curious indeed. I will say that common sense should tell us that if the purpose of these lockdowns is to keep too many people from being around each other, then telling a small bakery or a small tanning salon or a small furniture store or a small whatever that a small business that might have anywhere from 4 to maybe 10 people in there at the same time that you have to shut down because it would be way too unsafe to have all these people here. But Costco and Walmart and Target and Best Buy and all these big box stores that have sometimes hundreds of people in them, especially at a time when there are now curfews introduced, so the store can't remain open past this time and has to be open, it has to open later and close earlier, which means people are packed together even more. At times it felt like they were recreating the conditions for cold and flu season, that you had to just stay in your poorly ventilated home all day long, venturing outside only to go and do the basic necessities at the exact same place that everyone else is doing it during the exact same time that everyone else is doing it. This, like you said, this wasn't driven by data or science or even common sense. Was this purely just was this just a blatant power grab and money grab for the rich?
I mean, it certainly was a blatant power and money grab. In terms of the intentions, I've left the book as a choose your own adventure. You could decide that it was sort of incompetence driven. You could decide that, it was these small businesses were just too small to matter. And so the government needed to appear as if they were doing something. And so small business just becomes like the cannon fodder. Or it could be that small businesses are too hard to control. Politically, they're not expedient. So why not just, whatever happens to them, if they die, don't really care. It doesn't matter. They're not helping us in any way. And so, I leave that up to the reader. I lay out the data and facts. The entire book is sourced with hundreds and hundreds of sources, many of them from media outlets that are considered, left-leaning or mainstream or corporate press or whatnot. And you can just make that determination. But here's the thing, is it really doesn't matter what the intentions are. People often get very hung up on intentions. The outcomes are always what matters. And regardless of which path you choose, the outcome is the same. And the consolidation of power, these central planners and the consolidation between big government, big business, and big special interests never works out well for the little guy, whether that be, the average individual or a small business or whatnot. So, I kind of don't even care what the intention is. I
Right.
just care about the outcomes.
Yeah, I'm reminded whenever we talk about, debate or discuss whether it's a case of anything is a case of government being inept or evil or some combination between them. I'm reminded of the scene from Casino where, in fact, his name was Roth, I think, where the casino
Hyman
owner,
Roth.
Hyman Roth, yes,
Hyman Roth. Good
yes.
Uncle Jaime.
Old Uncle Jaime
Yes,
goes to the casino, and he's hired one of the corrupt government officials, stepson or something like that, and or son-in-law, and the guy's an idiot, and he's sitting there and watching one jackpot after the next on the slots, and they're losing a fortune, and he fires him on the spot, and his assistant says, well, he said that it was a mistake. How do you know that he was in on it? He said, I don't care if he's in on it. If either he's in on it or he's an idiot. Either way, he's gone, and it's the same thing here. Government's it's probably some combination of ineptitude and evil, but it really doesn't. It doesn't matter. I will say I think that the motivation largely has to do with the coincidental fact that they get hundreds of millions of dollars to their campaign coffers from the people that were allowed to stay open, and they don't get that from the people who were shut down. Now, so your latest book, you say the number one risk for starting or running a small business in America today is the government at all levels. What do you mean? So when you say, you say the number one risk, there's no higher risk? I know that, and this stat, you can tell me if this stat's true or not, but I remember hearing when I started my small business that 90% of small businesses fail in the first year or two or something like that. Is that even accurate? I've heard that so many times.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate amongst the statistics. I would say it's probably more like 90% fail within a 5 to 10 year period, but the majority do fail within 5 years. So it's very, very difficult to succeed as a small business. And there's a lot of kind of failure to succeed of businesses that stay open but don't really kind of earn what you might think of when you think of a business success. So it's a very, very challenging situation. A lot of risk. Most of these small business owners are risking their own capital. They're putting in their time. They're putting in their soul into this business. And when I wrote my first book, I talked about all of these other risks in terms of employees and trying to find customers and risk reward. And then, 18, 19 months ago, we get to the point in the United States of America where the government said, no, I'm sorry, you can't open your business. We're going to take your business for the quote unquote good of society, something that, should have been eminent domain if they were going to enact it, and we're not properly compensated. So like the complete subjugation of your property rights is a huge, huge risk that now all of a sudden is standing there that really never kind of entered into anybody's brains before 19 months ago.
Well, and that's the incredible thing about it is if someone had gone back in time and told me this time 2 years ago, or any of us,
right,
the government is going to use a disease that has a roughly 1% fatality rate, give or take. Something that is more serious than the flu, but not exponentially more so. And they're going to use this as a pretext to shut down almost every business and pretty much all of the small businesses in this country. Then they're going to hand us a few $100s every few months of our own money. And at the same time, in those same bills, they're going to hand off trillions of dollars to big businesses, multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporations, and themselves, big government agencies. And then they're going to have a employee protection loan program that is largely going to go to big businesses and their franchises. And there's going to be this massive exodus of small business owners. And then, and not to mention all the stuff that's happened since then. And they're going to run up well over 10 trillion. They're going to spend well over $10 trillion, run up $7 trillion of debt inside of 2 years. All of this for this virus. I would have said, wish I didn't believe you, but I think that might be possible. But I wouldn't think that it would be accepted as easily as it was. This was fear, right? They used fear to just scare us into destroying our own livelihood.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually, it's funny that you say that. I had this discussion in February 2020 with my husband as we kind of heard what was going on in China. It was pretty clear that the virus was going to, be going into other places. And we said, okay, it's going to come here. Like, let's say it's bad. Like, what would you do? Like, do you think that they could just shut everyone down for 2 weeks? If it's a 2-week incubation period, do you think we could shut everyone down for 2 weeks? And after this lively debate, we're both like, no, there's just no way that you could do it. The clever thing that they did, and again, I don't know how much of it was intentionally clever or just kind of the way that it falls out of the system, is that we didn't have lockdowns or shutdown. I mean, not everybody was locked down. It was just certain people that were horribly deemed non-essential by the government. Like the government can give you the essential or non-essential label. And so the people with the clout and the connections and who were in the club didn't feel the pain. They actually did quite well. I mean, if they had shut down Walmart and Target and Amazon's warehouse and your local grocery store, if the Federal Reserve hadn't intervened to prop up the stock market and everything was spiraling down, I think it's safe to say that this wouldn't have lasted 2 or 3 weeks. I think there would have been a huge outcry and we would have been done with. But because the most vulnerable part of society was the one that was the sacrificial lamb, as always is the case, and everybody else was kind of left to go about their business and in many cases benefit from it. That's how they were able to get away with it. And then the messaging to sort of the average layperson, the media did a horrible job per usual of holding anyone accountable. They just went with whatever the story was and ran cover for these horrible infringements on rights and ridiculous policies. And so that then created amongst certain people this culture of fear and irrationality. And the fact that we were already polarized and the government had already tricked us into pointing the fingers at each other instead of back at the government just sort of exacerbated the whole situation.
So I keep seeing in the comments a reference to the NFIB, the National Federation of National Federation of Independent Business, and none of it is positive. So I do you have any take on the NFIB? They're basically saying it's supposed to be a small business lobby, but they're completely ineffectual. They don't really lobby for small businesses. Do you have a take on them? I've heard of them, but I don't know much about them.
I cite them in the book. I mean, NFIB, I think, first of all, there isn't any group that does an effective job in lobbying for small business. So let's just put that out there. There just isn't one. So let's put that aside. NFIB I've always used as sort of a source of statistics. They do the Small Business Optimism Index, and they're sort of more of an organization that kind of follows the pulse of what's going on with small business rather than being sort of a lobbying group on behalf of small business. So I think that they've been very effective in terms of, that aspect. But again, there is because there's, that's the whole point of small business. Small business is decentralized. That's the great part about it. It allows economic freedom for anyone and everyone. But because it's decentralized. And so it's over different geographies. It's over different industries. It's over different size ranges. People are in business for different reasons. So it's very difficult to get a group of those together in agreement on things and then have enough money to kind of compete with these big businesses. And unfortunately, because the federal government is, so large and has sort of overtaken everything, under its purview, it creates a really bad situation for small business. And even at the local level, like the U.S. Chamber, where a lot of people's local chambers do a really good job for them. On a national level, I get their newsletters and sometimes I'm want to put my head through the screen about some of the things that they're supporting. So it's clear, on a national level, even the groups that are supposed to be the small business champions, whether it's the SBA, who put out loans and did so on a discriminatory basis to women and minority-owned businesses, got caught discriminating. And so they then said, okay, well, we're going to pull the funding from them and do it in a different way instead of going back to get enough funding for everyone. Those are the kinds of things that you're up against. The minimum passable, hey, we did something, is what's been happening for small business, which again is unfortunate given the fact that it's half the economy, but 99.9% of all the entities.
That's so, and this is the problem with the political process, is that it's more about the theater of the thing than actual value. If I, as a politician or as a political party or as even a political body like Congress or the White House or a state legislature or the governor can say, look at everything we've done, and sort of dazzle you with a bunch of things that were done without actually demonstrating any of them were effective, then it can sort of, I guess, again, dazzle people into saying, okay, I guess they're doing their best. They're doing, yes, things are bad, but they're doing their best. They're trying their best. The interesting thing about government, or at least big government, the coercive and centrally planned nature of it means that you either have to choose between using your business as a means of consolidating power, which means you're using the political process more than actually feeding the market. But it means it the other way too. If your primary purpose is to feed the need of the market and to prosper as a result of that, you're far less well-footed and well-suited to consolidate power and try to work towards the political process. So it's almost like it's not necessarily mutually exclusive, but there's certainly two different, there's very little overlap between that. So the more a business wants to grow into this mega business, the less and less it's actually serving the needs of the market, and the more and more it's consolidating its power to make sure it gets fed when no one else does. Sometimes by actually, doing a Malthusian thing of reducing what everyone's getting just to make sure I'm the only one eating, which is basically what we've seen in the last year and a half.
Yeah, no, it's very well said. And I always tell people, when I think about like concepts like free enterprise or capitalism and central planning, I kind of look at a spectrum, and I'm looking at, one half of the economy that's, standing for freedom and choice and transparency with those guardrails of property rights. To some extent, obviously, those were kind of thrown out the window over the last 19 months. And then, as you move along the spectrum, you have a handful of people using force, coercion, control, and usually a lot of opacity, making decisions on behalf of everyone. And you're right that as government has gotten bigger, the half of the economy that is large needs to be in sort of cahoots with the big government in order to be useful and to get the things that unfortunately tend to make them and the market less competitive. And so it does become this self-fulfilling cycle. And it's moved us away from free enterprise and capitalism towards the central planning. And that's why the best thing we can do, if we really shrunk the size of the government and took them out of, kind of all of these different things that they've stuck their noses in and their hands in, then these big businesses would be spending their time doing those things. And like you said, they would be competing on a fairer playing field and actually servicing the market better.
Right, exactly. This is not a free market. There are people acting in as free of a market as they can. Yes. The closest thing to a free market we have are small and medium-sized businesses trying to feed the needs. But even they, again, the example that Desiree gave, even they are having to deal with a minefield of regulatory burden that they have to face in order to do that. But certainly from a big business standpoint, we do not have a free market. We have an oligarchical system that is fed from the top down. You mentioned, that small businesses make up roughly half of the economy, but we also did see what you often refer to as the largest wealth transfer in history from Main Street to Wall Street. Yeah. Are they still half of the economy now? Or, do we have solid numbers on just how much the shift from small business to big business happened in this last year and a half?
So this all goes back to measurements, and then it also goes back to like how we come up with statistics and the time frame. So what happened, which is somewhat strange, but also somewhat predictable, given all of the decisions that were made by central planners, over the last year and a half or so, is that a lot of people actually started side hustle businesses. So if you had left the workforce and you were getting unemployment or an enhanced unemployment benefit and maybe some stimulus, you're like, well, I'm not doing anything, so I'm gonna, sell pot holders on Etsy or whatever it is.
Right,
so
right.
The net amount. So even though we know that at a minimum, hundreds of thousands, and I think the numbers in the low 1 million to 2 million mark, at least that many businesses were murdered during this time period. On a net basis so far, we're actually showing growth in the number of businesses because all these people kind of took on these side hustles during the process. So of course, the narrative is going to be like, oh, look, we've actually spurred business creation, ignoring the fact that, you had millions of small businesses that were murdered. And then I think that, the next probably 18 months is going to be important to see how it shakes out, because there's so many small businesses that were just kind of hanging on by a thread. And in many cases, they had personal debt in order to affect the business before COVID even came along. And to see sort of the long tail effects of not only the direct mandates, but all the kind of longer tail issues like the shortage of labor and the supply chain or whatnot, I don't think we'll have a really good picture of what this all looks like for probably another year and a half. But we know that for many, it was a bloodbath. Millions and millions either survive or just hanging on by a thread.
I know anecdotally, I had many friends who had, and loved ones who had spent years building up their small business only to lose it over the course of a few weeks. And there was nothing they could do about it, especially in the opening months of the pandemic. But even the ones that were able to hang on and they thought there's no way this is going to last past the summer, and they were in a state where it did, and then they finally had to wrap things up by the end of the year. I've even had a few that were able to hold out all through last year, and then with when things started ramping back up this year, that was their their point where they couldn't hold on anymore. And some of them it's because of the labor shortage. Now at the same time, as you said, I know other people who always had worked for someone else, and now they have a bunch of side hustles. They got involved in the gig economy. They're doing stuff on Etsy. A couple of them started their own Patreon and are doing stuff there. There's all sorts of different things that have happened, which is that why we're seeing this push for the IRS to have more view of your bank account and requiring Venmo and Cash App and all these other things to disclose all of your transaction information? Are they seeing that there's this new rise of entrepreneurs and making sure they got to get their hooks in as soon as it happens?
Oh, you mean so you don't think that it's actually because they're going after the billionaires? As Janet Yellen goes, oh, we're trying to catch the billionaire tax cheats. They're looking at people who have $600 in their bank.
Listen. If you eat an elephant one bite at a time, okay? If you want to go after billionaires, you got to get them for those $650 transactions, or you're never going to find them, Carol. So obviously this is about billionaires. Is it possible, even though the main focus of this is clearly to go after billionaires, is it possible that this might negatively affect small businesses too?
Yeah. Okay. So let's just walk back to the American Rescue Plan, because this actually got lost in the shuffle. So this is kind of like the war on small business. This is the war on the middle class, and it's all tied together. It all goes back to either you are really wealthy and powerfully connected and you're inside the club, or you're really poor and we're going to buy you off. But if you're in the middle, we got to find something to do with you. So in the American Rescue Plan, the almost $2 trillion idiot plan that came out in March after the vaccines had been rolled out, after things had been stabilized, people's personal saving rate had been as high as it's been since World War II. They pushed through the stimulus, but of course it's never just stimulus. There's always these weird things that are buried in these bills that most people don't pay attention to. So buried into that particular bill, which goes into effect, the reason I think people haven't talked about it because it hasn't gone into effect yet. It goes into effect January 1st of 2022, is that if you are selling on Etsy or eBay or all these places, it used to be that they would issue a 10K. It's like a 1099. I've got my financial head out, a 1099 to you for tax reporting purposes.
Right.
If you had done about $20,000 worth of transactions or about 200 transactions during the year, saying, like, we know you're not a hobbyist. This, like, you're doing this on an ongoing basis. You're a business, so you should be reporting this. This has now been shifted to, if you make $600 is the magic number. If you make $600, you are now going to get this reported to the government. So if you're like a hobbyist, who maybe sells a few sneakers, or you've got, your Tupperware collection from the 80s and you throw it up, but like, you are now, if you, over the course of the year, it aggregates at least $600, like, you will be getting that 1099K report sent to the IRS and sent to you. So you better report that stuff. So that's the first piece of it. So again, this is not about the big guys. This is about going after hobbyists, moms, the gig economy, all these kinds of things. And then that second piece of it is really looking into your bank accounts. And just to be clear, because there's been a lot of confusion about this, what they're proposing, and who knows what's going to end up happening, if anything, is they're saying if you have any account that has $600 in it, we are going to ask for your aggregate inflows and outflows. So they're not looking at every transaction individually reported, they're looking at the aggregate. So if you buy a whole bunch of stuff, that's one number. And if you get paid a whole bunch of stuff, like, that's another. Those two numbers are coming in for every single account. Or if you have a transaction that's more than $600 that flows through the account, they're also going to get a report. So either of those can be a trigger. And again, this is not about going after the 600 and something billionaires in the United States. As many of my followers have pointed out to me, there's a reason they're also trying to hire 87,000 IRS agents. And again, it's not to go after 600 billionaires. So they are coming after you. I mean, people are like, oh, you're being hysterical. I'm like, I'm not being hysterical. Like, people need to know what is happening. And this is not going to plug any gap. They just want to be in control. And I think they want the data to move towards this digital currency, to ultimately move towards a social currency system, where at some point in time, because, it worked the last time they decided they were going to be tyrannical and tell you what to do. But in the future, oh, I'm sorry, like, you've eaten 3 steaks this month. The limit is 2 for, climate change. So we're going to, cut it off. We see this in your transactions. I'm sorry, you can't eat that steak. I mean, I know it sounds dystopian and ridiculous, but does it really after, the last year and a half? I don't think so.
Yeah, I was going to say, anyone who's going, they'd never do that. What would you have said in 2019 if we told you all the stuff that happened in the last year and a half was going to happen? You would have said, there's no way, at least not for quite some time. They're going to do it in a couple months. And by the time it shows up, half the country is going to be, a sizable minority of the country is going to be cheering it on and demanding even more because they're scared. And that's what they do. They use fear. I have
people now who've already said, oh, well, why do you care if you're not cheating? Why do you care if they have that information? I mean, there are people with this mindset already kind of fostering that narrative. And that's going to be the narrative. If you're playing on the straight and narrow, why do you care? We're just trying to catch the cheater. Sure you are. Sure, that's what this is all about. Like, we're employing somebody for like $100 and something thousand a year because like somebody on eBay like misreported $15. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the government never ropes anyone up on things they didn't do. I mean, that's why we don't have to have a Fifth Amendment or Fourth Amendment protections or, attorneys in court. They just want to find the truth. They're certainly not going to, incorrectly accuse anyone of anything. No, you're 600.
They never weaponized the IRS either. They've never done that. So it's not like they would do that.
Political use of the IRS? First of all, how dare you suggest that anyone even thinks that? I think it's ridiculous. And, $600 transaction, it's not as though back in December, almost everyone got $600. Like, it's so blatant what they're doing. Anyway, so the here, we can talk about I have many followers who may not own a small business, may not work for a small business, may not realize how it's affecting them. But what is, for example, we were talking about this thing with the supply chain, what's happening right now. There are all these ships that are out to sea, and we're now going to play a game. Usually it's similar to 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. This is going to be, I guess, 6 Degrees of Small Business. You're going to explain how this, because I almost jokingly said, well, it's not like that had anything to do with small business. And you're like, actually it does. So explain how what's going on with small business is affecting this backlog of ships that we're seeing, where, the supply chain's being so destroyed that, there's like literally hundreds of ships waiting at shore to be able to deliver their goods to the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, so this goes back to the central planners deciding that they were going to shut down like a third of the economy, and that they could just turn it back on whenever they wanted, as if they were power cycling a modem, right? So it kept a ton of people, and it still kept a ton of people out of the workforce. I mean, we're at the point now, the JOLTS report just came out this week, 10.4 million job openings. So when you don't have people who are able to work, things happen in terms of the supply chain on every single level. It affects the trucking supply. A lot of people who were truckers decided they were going to either, change jobs or go work for Amazon, because there wasn't as much of a demand for things like oil during the pandemic because people had to stay home. And then, now it's hard to get those people back because they've transitioned, and it's not like you can just pull somebody off the street and say, hey, do you want to drive an oil truck? Go ahead and get in there. And so, that level of disruption in terms of moving goods from one place to another is as a direct result of the decision. It's also then affecting supply and demand, because they put a ton of money into people's hands through stimulus, through the unemployment bonuses. And so all of that money, plus all the money that let's not just gloss over the trillions of dollars that the Fed printed and put into the market. And so all of that market is now chasing fewer goods, because if you've got fewer people working, obviously they cannot produce at the same level that they would have produced before. And so the prices of everything ultimately goes up, because they have to pay labor more if they can get it, and because of basic supply and demand. So everything that you're seeing with the small businesses, the plight of the small businesses, the shortage of the workers, the inability to get certain kinds of goods and services, the increase in prices, this is all just a couple steps up the food chain from that set of decisions from the central planners, because of course they think they know better than the markets. And the frustrating part for me in all of this is, you hear Jerome Powell, head of the Federal Reserve, come out. You hear Janet Yellen. You hear these people come out and go, oh, well, we never anticipated that this would be the outcome, whether it was, they've been off on inflation by a factor of at least 3 at this point. The supply chains, I've been doing economic commentary this entire time. Like, I talked about it from day one. I have a lot of other people, Mitch Rochelle, and I can name 10 other people. We've been talking about this from day. Like, we all knew this. How did you not know this? And you're in charge of making these decisions. So again, either they're incompetent or they're just lying. And in that particular case, I'm not going to let you choose your own adventure. They're lying. There's no way that these people did not know that.
Although the thing is, you're a very smart lady. You are the expert. You are the small business queen. You're also the heir to the Schneiderman Electric fortune. It's possible that you just had the keys to this and you knew when they didn't. So, but no, I agree. I think that this is.
I would just like to say my father was so happy that you actually made him the small business owner, because he just worked for somebody else's electric company. Like he wasn't that far up the food chain. So there was no Schneiderman Electric, unfortunately.
I am creating the mythos of Schneiderman Electric, okay? And that's just it is what it is. On this show, there was a Schneiderman Electric, okay? Everywhere else you can say that. Perfect. This show, Schneiderman Electric. No, so it's incredible watching this, because like you said, these are supposed to be the geniuses running the economy, right? And this is what we talk about in libertarian. First, are you a libertarian?
So my platform, as I think I've mentioned to you offline, is I stand for small business, small government, and big hair.
Big hair.
So yeah, so basically, I always say I'm like libertarian adjacent or libertarian-ish, individual rights-ish. I'm never comfortable joining a group. It's just a personal thing. But I voted for you.
By the way, that's the most libertarian answer to that. I don't join things. I'm just doing my own thing. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I did vote for you and Joe. Actually, I voted libertarian in the last 2 elections. So it's not that I am or I'm not. I'm hanging around the edges. Let's just say it that way. You haven't claimed me yet, folks. You haven't claimed me yet. But I'm hanging around the edges.
I say, are you a libertarian? She says, well, I vote libertarian and have been for several years now, but I don't want to be grouped in with anything. I don't do groups. The most libertarian. By the way, if you want to start a libertarian big hair caucus, I'm the guy that started the Waffle House caucus. It started as a joke. We're on pace to be the largest caucus in the party very soon. So if you need help, I can help you with that. But so for those that believe in free markets, we can put it that way. For those who believe in free markets, we recognize that the problem with these centrally planned economies is that even if you put the smartest people in charge of it ever, they can never understand all the market inputs happening at the micro level, at the local level that they need to know to be able to make big decisions. It's not even possible to make a big decision that can equitably and fairly affect everyone. It's best to leave that money and that power as decentralized as possible. And of course, those types of positions don't attract the smartest and most ethical people. They attract sociopaths and liars and idiots and morons and people that are literally sundowning and going senile in front of us on TV while they run the country. Like they attract the worst, absolute worst people. And even if they were great people, it still wouldn't work as well as just giving people the freedom to be able to do things themselves. Now, this...
Wait, can I just add into that for a second? I was having a conversation with someone earlier today. It's like, imagine that you had like a blind resume and you said you want each member of Congress and all these quote unquote important people in leadership positions of government to put their resume like what they know, like what their background is, maybe some transcripts of things that they've said and done, and you just left the name off, you left the party, I was blind, and you put this in front of people, you said, we're going to put these people in charge of running $8 trillion plus before COVID on all different levels, purview that extends into like every aspect of your life, from healthcare to school to whatnot. Like, what do you think of this group of people? You'll be like, are you kidding me? Like, those are the people that you have in charge? I mean, that's what the system that we have in place. Yeah. And so it's like, it's just it's like you don't have those professional, smartest people, which, like you said, still wouldn't be able to do it. And they have all of those things underneath them. I mean, it is like the worst of all outcomes. And the fact that more people can't see that sort of very obvious and clear situation is pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah, I remember as a kid hearing the Will Rogers, I think it was Will Rogers quote that we do better. Maybe it was H.L. Mencken. It was someone who said basically we do better to just randomly pick people in the phone book.
Right? Yes.
I was like, I laughed and I'm like, but that's not really true. It's true.
It's 100% true.
This attracts bad people. Like, this much power attracts idiots, monsters, and idiots that are used by monsters. The useful idiots. Yeah, absolutely. Sociopaths, and they're useful idiots, and that's the problem we have here. Now, here is a question I have about what I think might be coming up, and you can tell me if I and my fan Ken who put this up if we're maybe getting ahead of ourselves here. Ken said, I'm a wildland fire contractor, new to the business side of it. I bought a fire engine and got it outfitted, ready to go for next year. It looks like I will not be able to be a responder, to be able to respond due to the mandatory vaccination order for all federal government employees, contractors, and subcontractors. So one less engine to fight wildfires. Now, putting aside the absurdity of that, I can't help but feel, again, I'm a libertarian. I unfortunately, my predictions, the more cynical they are, it just takes slightly longer for them to come true. It's not really that they ever don't happen. It just might take longer. I feel like the next big thing that they're going to hammer small businesses with is, this vaccine mandate right now, which hasn't even actually been filed, is being focused on big businesses, but it feels like that's not going to last. It feels like the next big thing they're going to slam these small businesses with is vaccine mandates or something related to the vaccines. Am I off here?
So, I mean, anything that they sort of trial run with a big business that they exempt the small business for, if it endures, and I think that's the question is, will this mandate actually hold up, or does this virus cycle out naturally by the time it gets through the courts and the whole thing becomes moot? But yeah, it always cycles down to small business,
Right.
and usually they'll find a way for the big guys to come up with some exemption or workaround. So the fact that they even started in that way makes my spidey sense, or back in the day the schneidi sense, tingle a little bit and say, yeah, what's the problem? But regardless of what it is, it still will impact small business. So even let's say the nurses, the firefighters, the flight attendants, the pilots, so on and so forth, decide I'm going to sit on the sideline and wait this out.
Yep.
It's not like they're probably going to go join your local small business. They're probably not waiting tables or cutting hair or doing those things in the interim. All it does is drag on the economy. And as we talked about before, that creates this sort of additional vicious cycle, keeps more people out, increases inflation. And all of those things end up having the biggest impact on the small business, because the small business doesn't have the access to capital to be able to weather the storm. They don't have the ability to invest in technology, to maybe make replacements for some of the labor. So all of the things that, even if they don't directly come at the small business, it always ends up hurting them. I mean, the perfect example coming out of the Great Recession was the Dodd-Frank legislation. So, you had in the Great Recession situation, a lot of financial institutions, they took on too much risk. They were deemed too big to fail and, got a bunch of taxpayer money. Instead of a slap on the wrist, they got a bunch of taxpayer money. And then their supposed slap on the wrist was, we're going to legislate you, which is always a huge gift to big business instead of small business. And so when Dodd-Frank came out, and the statistics are in the book, and I'll give you kind of macro, but you can get the actual numbers in there because they always get jumbled in my head. But basically it was something within the years afterwards, the formation of new small business banks went from an average of 100 a year to 3, and it killed a bunch of small business and community banks. And then I know this is going to be super surprising to you and probably everyone watching, but which banks do you think lend to small businesses? Small banks or big banks? It's the small banks. So small business lending took a huge nosedive, while lending to big businesses increased. So something that was meant to rein in these big financial institutions actually gave them free rein and less competition, and ended up killing off small business. And that's the cycle that happens every single time. So that's why I'm always, skeptical of, we're going to do this thing and it's only going to be, for these big guys. It's that same thing. Once you concede the principle, you concede the principle. It's why they're talking about taxing the rich and the billionaires, but then we're talking about the $600 accounts. It's every single time, it just always comes back to the people who don't have the political clout and connections.
Yeah, it is the foxes saying, the problem is that the hens aren't being regulated enough. and
Right.
it always just so happens to help the foxes. And it's one of the things that, going back to what you were talking about with the supply chain, how something that they did that hurt small businesses worked its way, I guess, up the food chain to the global shipping logistics system
Yeah.
and the supply chain into the US. For you and me and anyone with common sense, or anyone who isn't, in on it, in on the scam, this would lend itself to the fact that central planning is a bad way to plan an economy. But for people who it is essential to centrally plan the economy for them to continue their grift, this really just lends itself to more automation, that they don't have to rely on labor, because they'll have more and more robots and machines doing it. This, at least initially, also hurts small businesses more, because the benefit of automation is that you have that initial high upfront cost of purchasing and retrofitting, but then ongoing you save a bunch of money on an economy of scale. But for a small business that can't afford a robot, now they're screwed. And especially when the, everything from minimum wage to every labor regulation, health regulation, environmental regulation, occupants or safety regulation, everything else keeps hitting them. Is that not another, is automation potentially the next thing that's going to hit small businesses hard as well?
I mean, it's huge, and there's a reason why. If you look down at the breakdown of the 31.7 million small businesses, 6 million of them have employees, but the rest are solopreneurs. They rely on contractors and the like. And the reason is that it's so difficult and costly to hire that first employee. And it's because of the government. I mean, the government's inflation of everything is something that we don't spend any time talking about, whether it's the costs that have been added to your house, or the cost of opening a business, or the cost of keeping people out of the labor force. And because of the rising minimum wages, because of the additional benefits that you have to have, things like insurance. And in my business, I have somebody who works from home on a computer who works for me, and I have to have workers' compensation insurance in Illinois. The cost, I mean, it's like not funny, but it's like ridiculous, like thousands of dollars that could be going to my employee, but no, has to go to like some government crony. And on the Illinois website, they actually brag about the fact that they have like the most workers' compensation insurance underwriters out of any state. And I'm like,
because they make
that's
them.
not a good thing. Like, that's horrible. But people are like, oh wow, that's amazing. So like it was like all of those things end up being an issue. And like from an automation standpoint, as I said, if you don't have access to capital, whether your business model could afford it or not, if you don't have the access to capital, either way, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to figure out and automate it. And obviously it's just harder for that small business. And the other thing that small businesses are going to have to contend with probably before automation is, I don't know how familiar you are with the PRO Act that's making its way through Congress, but this is the anti-gig worker legislation that was sort of like started in California under AB 5 and then has been adopted on a national basis, that's basically trying to destroy gig work. So that's 59 million jobs that are either solopreneurs or contractors that are used by small businesses who either may not need somebody full time, or is like, hey, I can't afford all the costs of bringing on an employee, but I can pay you X, and maybe you get a bunch of other clients and you figure out your own health insurance and other benefits and whatnot. And so they're really, for people who like to talk about your choice, your labor, your choice is completely being threatened by all of this big government. Obviously, we're seeing that with the vaccine mandate, but then, you'll be seeing it with PRO Act, which, by the way, is already passed. I think it's the House and is now sitting in the Senate, which is really scary.
Yeah, all of these things boil down to one person saying, hey, I'd like to provide this service to someone or good or service to someone for a certain amount of money. If only I could find someone who could give me money. And then someone else goes, hey, what a coincidence. I have some money and I'd really like that good or service. And the government goes, no. This needs me involved. I need to get involved in this. Something's wrong here. This looks fishy. Now, you're complaining that they make you get workers' compensation insurance, but I mean, thankfully, just be happy they didn't make you install a 1,000-gallon grease trap. Okay?
Like, think about that. So I don't know what kind of bakery Desiree was thinking about opening. It sounds like maybe cookies or cakes, which seems super dangerous. So I'm really glad that the government has saved us from those delicious cookies and cakes. But it's an ongoing issue. I mean, even people who just want to braid hair for a living, like people who do something that every mom and dad does to their kid before they send them off to school, and then you have to go out and spend thousands of dollars to get a license and then like get retrained, and most of the training has nothing to do with it. I mean, it's just a blatant cash grab. And again, the people that these rules are impacting, Desiree, a woman entrepreneur who wants to make that leap, the hair braiding, obviously in a lot of urban and underserved communities. Like, how are you helping the vulnerable? They're not. They want those people to become dependent on the government and just be part of this power grab. And it's super blatant. And I wish we could get more people to see it.
Yeah, government breaks your legs. This is a quote I use almost every day from Harry Browne, who, in my opinion, is the best. With all due respect to all of the other presidential candidates the Libertarian Party's ever had, he is, in fact, I believe is the best one we ever had. Jo Jorgensen was actually his running mate in 1996. She was his spike. Yeah, she was his spike. But he said, Harry Browne used to say, government's good at one thing. It breaks someone's legs, takes their wallet, uses some of the money to buy them some crutches, and says, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have those crutches. And that's what we see over and over again. The leg breaking in this case is all the regulatory burdens that they put on entrepreneurs, small businesses, anyone trying to get ahead who doesn't want to have to work for someone else, who doesn't want to have to live on assistance. All of these burdens are basically a regressive barrier. So the less money and capital you are already born with, the less able you are to climb that barrier, and the more relegated you are to either just working for someone else, if you're fortunate enough to even find a job, or having to, live off of assistance, or working in something illegal and now risking jail time and criminalization and all the terrible things that come from that. And it's an utter nightmare. The last thing I want to talk to you. Go ahead.
If I could just interject, because it reminds me of the PPP, because a lot of people, it's the same kind of thing where they were like, oh, but government, they gave PPP. And I kept saying, I'm familiar with Harry Browne. I think I quoted him in the book. I'm not sure if it was the final draft or a previous draft, but I definitely was kind of following his stuff. But in a similar vein, it was like, basically the government was like an arsonist that like burned down your house and then started a GoFundMe and went like, aren't you glad that I set up a GoFundMe and raised a few bucks for you? I mean, it's like, it's just so insane. And I don't think people understand that PPP was a fraction of the overall money that was spent, not just in CARES, but in all of the relief packages, and that it didn't even come close to compensating people for the subjugation of their property rights. So, it's that well, we threw a little bit of money at it. You should be thankful. Look at the great things that I did.
Of your money that I stole from you after I hobbled you. What a great thing I've done. What a fantastic thing. Clearly, we need more of me and what I do. Since I am a libertarian and am contractually obligated to mention the Federal Reserve anytime I have a conversation that is longer than 15 minutes long, can we talk about the Federal Reserve very briefly? So for a little bit of background, since the Federal Reserve was created, ironically enough, on the same year that the IRS was created, but in 1913 it was created, and in the 108 years that it has existed, the U.S. dollar has lost 98 cents on its value. In other words, imagine if your money was worth 50 times what it is right now in today's dollars. That's how much you have been robbed by the Federal Reserve. Can you talk specifically a little bit about how the Federal Reserve has harmed entrepreneurs and small businesses?
Absolutely. And I did devote an entire chapter 5 of the book is all about the Federal Reserve. But
you're not a libertarian.
But I tried to use very clear language for people who aren't economic wonks and try to Sesame Street it, because it is super complicated intentionally.
Yes.
I'm also not a libertarian, but I did happen to quote Murray Rothbard a few times as well. I'm just putting that out there.
If only there was a term to describe your belief system when it comes to economics.
But in terms of I just want to put it in context of what's happened over the last year and a half, and then we can certainly go back in time a little bit further. But when I talk about this historic wealth transfer, it was done on two levels. And I think most people understand I shuttered a small business. People couldn't shop there. Those dollars went to Amazon and Walmart and their revenue increased. I think people understand that. The part that they don't understand is the trillions of dollars that the Federal Reserve printed, as well as suppressing the interest rates, abnormally and keeping them at almost 0%. And that is what enabled, in terms of the market, the multiple expansion and the asset inflation, to the point where 7 tech companies in 2020 gained $3.4 trillion in value. Oh, by the way, just about the amount of money that was printed during that period of time by the Federal Reserve. Coincidence? Yeah, pretty much. Not a coincidence. But basically, they are suppressing these interest rates. If you are a saver, if you are a retiree, if you're somebody you're used to having some sort of return on your money when you invest it, you put it in the bank, into a CD, into a money market fund, you're basically earning nothing, because that's what they did to the market. But then they go and they loan that out to companies at also almost no interest rates, as well as throw all of this new money that they've created out of nowhere that devalues the money that's already in the system. And the big companies then can access that capital and use that to compete with big businesses, and it inflates the value of those particular companies, and it basically disrupts risk in the entire system. So if you're somebody who's trying to get a return on investment, you have to take on more risk in order to get the same return that you would have in normal times. And it's got to the point where, there was so much money that was put into the system, and the risk was so far disrupted by all of this printing that some of the bigger companies had nothing left to do with it. They started competing with individuals buying up single family housing. So now you go out and you try and buy a house, and you're competing with a private equity firm or a hedge fund or BlackRock to purchase a house. And so this is all done because these quote unquote central planners think that they know how to manage the stock market and the overall economic system better than the free market does. Unfortunately, all that does is it just keeps taking money away from Main Street. The small businesses suffered, the retirees suffered, the savers suffered, anybody who didn't own assets suffered. Right. And we're, of course, now paying on the other side of it with increased inflation, which, again, if you don't own assets, you're not getting any kind of ancillary benefit out of it. And that's the kind of the wealth transfer over time. And unfortunately, like you said, this started in 1913, but it's really accelerated incredibly rapidly in the last 20 years, really the last, kind of whatever it is, 15 years now. It's the amount of money that has been printed, the amount of years that we have had 0% interest rates. It's unfathomable to think. And part of the issue is that they have actually, not to say that their original mandate made any sense, but they're not even fulfilling their original mandate. Their original mandate is to stabilize prices. Obviously, they're not doing a great job with that.
Yeah, not so much.
And to maximize employment. Obviously, 10.4 million jobs, they're not doing a great job with that. And let's be honest, any sort of monetary policy is not going to get anybody back into the workforce at this point in time. So what is really their agenda? And I keep talking about this hidden agenda, which is not that hidden from the Federal Reserve, which is to obviously prop up Wall Street for their buddies and their cronies, but also to give a shield for spending to the federal government. Because the reality is that the federal government cannot afford for interest rates to increase, because the overall amount of our national debt is so high that as it continues to increase, we're just going to spend more and more of our spending on interest expense to service that debt. which will crowd out spending on all these other ridiculous things that they spend on.
Right.
But at least that's spending on something and not just servicing the debt. And then also, I mean, people laugh at like this whole modern monetary theory, MMT. But basically, we have been monetizing the debt. I mean, the whole reason during these rescue packages that we were able to put so much money out there, it's not like there was another country or all these investors who were standing by ready to buy like treasuries. The Fed was buying them. So they are, at this point in time, monetizing the debt and enabling the bad and reckless spending of the US government that if they weren't there, the government wouldn't be able to continue to do. So it's just a very sick symbiotic relationship. And it's something that really needs to be reined in. But like, how many people do you know that have called their congressperson and said, hey, like, could you bring up reining in the Fed? Not enough.
I know. I was going to say I know a lot, but I'm a libertarian. But in the general public, not so many. In the general public, not so many. And it's intentionally kept obscure and arcane for that reason, right?
Exactly.
It's not visceral.
By design.
It's hard to make it.
That way. Right.
Yeah, exactly. The two analogies I always use are, imagine if you're playing a game of Monopoly and, you and I are playing by the rules. We have our turn, we roll the die, we have the fixed amount of money that we were given. We try to, make money as well as we can by, buying and selling and so forth and renting and, developing the properties that we have. But there's a third player that can go to the banker and say, give me 1 billion notes and stick them with a bill for it. Or actually, stick us all with the bill for it. And they just get however many notes they want. That's how they're gaming the system. Not just and like you said, in the natural way, people understand that means I can buy everything up. But what they also don't get is that it means that I can drive up the price of everything. So even with whatever amount of money you still have, or you and I still have, that other player, by making everything so expensive by buying everything up, now what little money we have, we can't even buy with that. And the other analogy I use is, imagine if we had a slice, if we had a pizza, and I said, okay, you get 8 slices of this pizza, and originally, or you get 4 slices of this pizza, and it was originally sliced into 8. Then I slice it into 16. You still get your 4 slices, but now you have a quarter of that slice. When you keep printing out notes, Federal Reserve notes, without having a corresponding increase in the overall value of the monetary supply, you're making each one of those notes that much less valuable. Before I get into a whole rant about how the military-industrial complex is toppling governments just to keep our monetary system afloat, which, I mean, hopefully what we've just said...
I want to react to that, because on your Monopoly example, I feel like one of my friend's fathers, because he used to do that.
Oh, okay. Oh, he would do that? Give me $1 billion, yeah.
I know somebody who plays Monopoly that way. But, I also just it's interesting, if you and I made up a bunch of money in our bank accounts and tried to go buy things with it, we would call that fraud.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that's you just adding dollars in and saying I'm going to go buy, that's considered fraud when you and I do it.
Fraud, yeah.
Somehow when the Federal Reserve does it, it's monetary policy. It's very interesting how that happens. And
it's literally the exact same thing. It is an entity saying, this money exists now. I just made $1 trillion, and I think I'm going to give it to these same people I always give it to, and I'm going to lend a bunch of it to the federal government, and they can pay me back over time with treasury notes, and everyone else will have to pay that off. Future generations that aren't even born yet. Which, by the way, if you haven't even been born yet and there's already taxes being run up in your name, that's as close to taxation without representation as I could ever think of. But what do I know?
Have you ever tried to take that one to court on behalf of somebody's unborn kid? I feel like that's a good thing to potentially try.
They don't have standing. They don't exist yet. This is the problem with the court system. We need laws that allow people that don't exist to sue. And then we can finally end the Federal Reserve by suing on behalf of the estimated 30 million kids or whatever that are going to be born. So all these things that are happening, we're seeing it. Many other people are seeing it. But it does get mentioned in the mainstream media, but it's not getting covered the way that it should. I would imagine this is the problem, not the nonsense they're talking about. Why do you think that it's not getting more coverage?
So I have 2 working theories. I mean, obviously I have no idea, but I always have a working theory about different things. One of it is that they're very complicit in the entire scenario as media, and I think an examination, truthfully, of all the things that they should be talking about would expose the fact that they've been complicit. I think the other piece, which is sort of a sign of the times, is the polarization of the sort of two major political parties, and the fact that it's become, some part sport, part religion at this point in time. And the fact of the matter is that both parties are to blame for this. I have to point out to people kind of every day on Twitter who don't want to hear this, but like these bad policies, at least in the last 18 months, and then obviously, things with the Federal Reserve before then and so on and so forth, like happened under the last administration and last Congress. And then the new administration, the new Congress, like doubled down and made it worse. But it's not like it just started like at the end of January of this year. And that's sort of an inconvenient truth for people. And the media is obviously very polarized by it as well. I keep saying, like, if I would have called this Trump's war on small business or Biden's war on small business, that like many more people would be talking about it. But nobody wants to hear that this is a systemic problem. And unfortunately, I'm just a truth teller, and that's the reality of the situation, and that's the story. But it's not sexy, and it doesn't work in sort of a polarized, sort of fantastical clickbait media situation. So anything that is a systemic issue with people who are part of the problem becomes very difficult to talk about, and which is why decentralized small businesses are incredibly important to the economy, and decentralized jobs via the gig economy are incredibly important to jobs. And, decentralized finance is important to fight back against the Fed. Same thing with decentralized media. What you're doing here right now, Spike, and all the people who are doing sort of these individual decentralized media plays in different formats, that is a pushback against the corporate press.
Yeah, I think there's two main things. It's like you said, there's this idea that if something is bipartisan, that means it's great. It's a great thing. If both sides of the entire political spectrum, because obviously there's nothing but Republicans and Democrats, if both sides agree, then that means that it's gospel. It is the best thing. Despite all evidence to the contrary that, the more they agree, the more likely it is to be a giant screw job for the vast majority of people on this planet. It probably results in mass murder somewhere, but it's bipartisan. But I also have to think that, most media is controlled by the Jews. No, most media is controlled by seven.
As is the weather, by the way, just to throw that out there, right?
Yes, no, absolutely. It's controlled by the weather. The Jews have it out for Southwest. That's why only Southwest. Everyone's like, how could it be that only Southwest was affected by weather? And I'm like, you don't want to answer it with the obvious answer. Anyway, so I think that the problem is that you have most of these media companies are owned by like 6 or 7 companies. And, and those are the big companies that are making all this money. So it's sort of a self-protecting system, which is again why I guess the mantra of libertarianism, not that you're one, but the mantra of libertarians and libertarian adjacent people such as yourself who quote Harry Brown and Rothbard is that we need to decentralize. Decentralization is not just more responsive. It's not just more efficient. It's not just more serving of people with individual needs, but it's the most ethical for me to say, you should have your power and your freedom and your money to be able to do what you want. I should be able to have the same for myself. We should be able to accumulate wealth and power based on what we're providing to the market, the value that we have, and nothing else. There should not be any coercion. It should only be, cooperation and so forth. So kind of wrapping things up, what are the things that we can do? And I guess on two fronts, on the political front and on the market front, what can we do to, fight what's happening in government? What would you say are like the top 1 or 2 things we should be doing? And then how can we best as individual consumers help as individual consumers help with small business?
Yeah, I think the political front question is one that I consistently grapple with and seek great answers for, because there are so many people who want to do things and they, they feel very helpless about it. So I don't purport to have the full answers here, but
Okay.
small things that end up adding up is that even though you're somebody who wants to be left alone, unfortunately, fighting for freedom and individual rights and that protection of it requires ongoing attention. And so, getting, not through coercion, but just asking nicely, people that that have similar outlooks, or other small business owners who share some of the same ideas, to get something really specific, whether it's reining in the Fed or small business legislation or whatnot. I always think like having one practical small thing to ask for and then doing the next one works better than kind of going macro and not really having direction. But call, like pick up the phone. I know everyone likes to email and text. Like nobody calls anymore. And if you have like 50 people who all called a representative at one point in time, like they would flip out. They wouldn't know what to do because nobody does it anymore. So all of a sudden it seems like, oh, this is a big thing that's picking up steam. Kind of like when Twitter trends a topic that has like 300 people talking about it. And you're like, why is this important? Because they said it was important, appears important, and then self-fulfilling, it becomes important. So I think that, that's, certainly the Fed, everything kind of starts and ends with money. It's just the sort of the way it is. And then, I'm a big fan of the whole concept of breaking up the duopoly. Using the whole idea of antitrust against the government and the two-party system. And obviously, I think this fits in well with libertarians. The fact that because of the duopoly, libertarians aren't invited to speak in debates, and we only have a very limited set of choices. I would be pushing more around that on the political front. So those are just a couple things. We'd love to get your feedback as well. But on the commercial side, this is where you have a ton of power, because you get to vote with your dollars. That's what capitalism is. And people are not always sort of intentional and thoughtful. One of the things that I've done with my book is, again, I'm a capitalist, so you can buy it wherever is convenient for you and a good value for you. But I've been pushing people to go buy it from local bookstores or through bookshop.org, which is an online service that fulfills through local bookstores, because it would be ridiculous of me to sit here and talk to you about, how you got this big business, big government, big special interest triumvirate, and go, and you can buy my book on Amazon.com.
Which is what I did when I gave the link to it in the original promo. I did the Amazon link, so I just got the.
That's our like default action. That's what we do. But I think it's important, like, if you've got the holidays coming up, which, by the way, if you haven't started holiday shopping, like, do it now, because there won't be any left to buy come December. But consider purchasing your gifts from small business owners. Like when you're going to a restaurant, like think about doing something in your local neighborhood. And again, sometimes it's just a reflex. It's just like, I haven't thought about it. I just don't want to think about things. But that when a bunch of people don't think about things, then everybody ends up shopping at Amazon, and the entire economy becomes consolidated in the hands of a couple of companies. And I don't think anybody wants to see that happen.
So that was her telling me, you schmuck, why would you do the Amazon link? So I'm literally changing that right now. Let me ask you, because I think it's important. Is there anything else politically that I should be adding to my messaging and telling people who basically feel helpless? Hey, I believe in all these things. Like, you and I are simpatico. Like, how do I affect change? Like, what is your advice on that? So I am a big fan of, like you said, calling people, calling representatives. Justin Amash is a friend of mine. He was a congressman up until this year, and he was in there for 10 years. And he said, you would be shocked at how few phone calls it takes for people in Congress to go, this is a big deal, especially if they're coming from a bunch of different places. If, 5 people in this constituency are calling this person and 5 people are calling this person and 5 people, 10 people are calling, all of a sudden they're getting together and going, this is a big deal. I think we need to get ahead of this. Now, obviously, if 100 people call Congress and say, end the Fed, that doesn't necessarily end the Fed, but you could maybe get the PRO Act killed. You could maybe get the CARES Act or whatever the infrastructure bill greatly hobbled by some on-the-fence senators who go, I'm not voting for this. I don't think I'll get reelected if I do. So you can definitely at least help, put some gum in the works. If the machine is basically, working towards making everything worse, you can at least put some gum in the machine, throw a couple wrenches in there at the federal level. There's a lot more that can be done at the state level.
Sure.
I've seen a handful of people go to a state legislature and you get stuff unanimously passed. And I think there's a lot of stuff that can be done at the state and local level to get rid of onerous occupational licensing laws, civil asset forfeiture, which is routinely used against entrepreneurs who don't look like they should have that much money. That kind of stuff can greatly help. Something as simple as saying that someone who has a criminal record should be allowed, once they've done their time, to be able to get a business license. Basic stuff where people that are the most in need of being able to work their way up the corporate up the economic ladder should be able to do so with as little infringements as possible. But I think as individual consumers, best thing we can do is to not do what I did, and I'm literally fixing it right now. I'm going to change this now. I'm literally going to delete it. Here's where, and there were even people are like, why Amazon? And I'm like, because that's where I found it. So you answering your question, the reason why I went to Amazon was I put in your book for sale, like the War on Small Business, Carol Roth, for sale. First thing that comes up, Amazon, Audible, all the main things. I don't think I even saw Bookshop. Here's where you can purchase Carol's book. Sorry. And now that's on there correctly. But it happens, and we're so used to doing stuff on Amazon, it just happens. But here's how we can actually help. So, first of all, Carol, I just want to thank you for coming on. This has been an incredible episode. Before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to give any final thoughts, anything that you thought you didn't get a chance to say, anything that you would like to, any teasers from your book. I got the graphic here. Your book, The War on Small Bit. Anything that you want to promote that's coming up, anything you want to say for as long as you want to say it. Carol Roth of Schneiderman Electric, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. I want to send my appreciation not only to you, Spike, but to the folks who connected us. I know the Eskimo Libertarian was one, so thank you for the idea. And I think that's the magic. As bad of a place as Twitter can be sometimes, I mean, how amazing is that? I said, whose podcast should I go on? They throw your name. I'm like, okay, great. If you reach us out, you reach out. And then, as I said, like with less than 24 hours, we're having a conversation. Yes. The fact that can happen is tremendous and just shows the power of, again, decentralized media. So thanks for the idea, Eskimo Libertarian, and others who I probably missed in the giant thread. And for taking the time to reach out, and everybody who's been sitting here and listening. If you are a small business owner, I will tell you, you did build that. You are the backbone of the economy, and we should be incredibly grateful to you for all your contributions. I know that I certainly am. And if there's anything I can ever do to be helpful, don't hesitate to reach out. I've got a contact form at carolroth.com. Try to help as much as I can. I'm on Twitter at CarolJSRoth. So ping me and I'll try to help. And just appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with like-minded folks who I'm not in a party with, but just happen to have a lot of the same ideas. I don't like
some
labels.
People...
And then most importantly, it is opening night, the first game of the hockey season for the Chicago Blackhawks, who are playing away at the Colorado Avalanche tonight. So I want to say go Blackhawks, and hopefully we'll have a good year, because I can't take another crappy hockey year again. It's been too much. And hopefully we'll continue the dialogue. I had a lot of fun.
I did too. Thank you, Carol. Stick around. We're going to talk during the outro. Folks, the book, again, The War on Small Business, How the Government Used the Pandemic to Crush the Backbone of America by Carol Roth. You can also go to carolroth.com. You can go to the bookshop.org link that is in the comments or on the show notes if you are listening to this as a podcast. One day when Carol discovers, when one of us can discover what her political beliefs are best described as, then we can help her with that. So if any of you hear this, you can put in the comments what you think it sounds like. Maybe we can help her find a political party other than the one she's been voting for the last 10 years. But Carol, thank you so much again for coming on. I really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And folks, thank you for tuning in to this amazing episode of My Fellow Americans. Why is it amazing? Because you're here. Well, also because Carol was here. But it was an amazing episode. Be sure to tune in tomorrow on Thursday at 8 p.m. for the Writer's Block, where my co-host Matt Wright is going to be interviewing Anna. Oh, man, I forgot her name. I forgot her last name. She's the chair of the Libertarian Party of Washington, and her name is Anna Johnson. I thought it was John. Anna Johnson. She is the chair of the Libertarian Party of Washington. She's going to be mad at me because I'm going to see her on Friday when I fly out to Washington State for the weekend. Come join me Friday in Seattle, Saturday in the Tri-Cities area, and Sunday in Spokane. If you go to let me put that in the notes, lpwa.org/mass non-compliance. Let me spell it right this time so you don't get a 404 error. And if you come out, you can see all the events that I'm going to be doing. I'm doing 7 different events over the weekend. Come out and see me if you live in Washington State. Also, on Friday at 8:30 Eastern, join Noel and Nalik right here for Cajun and Eskimo from Bayou to Igloo. Then on Monday at 8 p.m., join Jason Lyon for Mr. America, The Bearded Truth. His guest is going to be Jessica Etheridge. They're going to talk about the difference between feminism and empowering women, I think. Yes. And then join us Tuesday at 8 p.m. for another fantastic episode of The Muddy Waters of Freedom, where Matt Wright and I parse through the week's events like the sweet little winter boys that we are. And then join me right back here Wednesday, same Spike place, same Spike time for another amazing episode of My Fellow Americans. Folks, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Spike Cohen, and you are the power. God bless, guys.
They say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny when cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside, but the holes in the body that was alive. Now confined to a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to only find I'm in line. There's a pointless murder happening all the time. Either lose your life or mine. Caught up in their first desire. That ain't how it started, nah. How were we supposed to survive? There's a war going on outside. Who would want to raise a child? Whom the tomb is flashing by. Now you have to say goodbye when you watch them on the news at 5. Don't tell me how, tell me why.
me.